The marina restaurant smelled like salt air and expensive promises. Champagne glasses clinked. People laughed. My sister sat in the center of it all, telling everyone about her big next move. I stayed quiet, like I always did, until the server came back. He didn't ask who wanted the check. He didn't even look around the table. He placed it in front of me, no warning, no conversation, just an assumption everyone else seemed comfortable with. And in that moment, I realized something important. If this already feels familiar to you, stay with me, like, share, and subscribe. This story might change how you see power forever. I drove home along the coast with the windows down. The salt air felt sharp, almost clean. It didn't calm me. It didn't need to. I wasn't shaken. That surprised me more than anything else. When I unlocked my apartment door, the place looked exactly the same as I'd left it. Shoes by the wall, a folded blanket on the couch, the hum of the fridge filling the silence. Nothing was broken, nothing was missing. And yet something had shifted, quietly, without asking for permission. I set my bag down. I didn't rush. I didn't check my phone. I already knew what would be there. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because this wasn't new. It was familiar, like muscle memory. I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. The room felt steady. I noticed my hands weren't shaking. That's when it hit me. This wasn't shock. This was recognition. I've been here before. Not in this apartment, not after this dinner, but in the pattern. Years ago, it started small. A quick favor, a temporary fix, just this once. I remember nodding without thinking. It felt natural, helpful, responsible. Then it happened again, and again, always framed the same way. You're the stable one. You're good with money. You understand how things work. You don't mind. Right? And I didn't. Not out loud. I told myself it was love. I told myself this is what families do. Someone has to hold things together. Someone has to be practical when everyone else is chasing something shiny. I became that someone without ever being asked. I sat on the edge of the couch and stared at the opposite wall. I could almost hear those old conversations, layered over each other, not shouted, not cruel, just confident. We'll pay you back. You're better positioned than we are. It's not a big deal for you. No one ever said, "Is this okay?" No one ever asked, "What does this cost you?" They didn't have to. I filled in the answers myself. I picked up the remote and turned on a lamp instead of the overhead light. I've always hated bright lights at night. Too revealing, too honest. I thought about the first time I covered a bill that wasn't mine. I remember feeling proud afterward. Useful, needed. That feeling stayed with me longer than it should have. Over time, the favors stopped feeling like choices. They became expectations, quiet ones, polite ones, the kind no one thinks to question. And I played my part well. I showed up on time. I didn't complain. I smoothed things over when money got awkward. I absorbed the tension so everyone else could stay comfortable. That role wasn't forced on me by villains. That's the uncomfortable truth. It was reinforced by my own silence. Every time I said yes quickly, I taught them something about me. Every time I said, "It's fine," when it wasn't, I set a precedent. Every time I paid without discussion, I confirmed an assumption. I stood up and walked to the window. The water outside was dark now, reflecting only a few scattered lights from the docks. Boats rocked gently, tied in place, exactly where they were meant to be. I realized something standing there. Roles like this don't arrive announced. They settle in quietly. They grow roots when no one is watching. I wasn't assigned the role of provider because my family was cruel. I stepped into it because I was capable, because I could handle it, because I believed that being dependable was the same thing as being valued. There's a difference between choosing to help and being expected to carry. I blurred that line for a long time. I checked my phone then. Missed calls. A few messages. I didn't open them. I already knew the tone. Urgent. Confused. Slightly offended. I set the phone face down on the table. For the first time, I didn't feel the reflex to explain myself. That reflex had been trained into me, conditioned by years of smoothing edges and minimizing my own weight in the room. Tonight, it didn't show up. I went into the bedroom and took off my jacket, hanging it carefully in the closet. Small, deliberate movements. The kind you make when you're grounding yourself without thinking about it. I sat on the bed and let the quiet stretch. No soundtrack. No internal monologue racing ahead, just space. And in that space, I saw the pattern clearly. The role wasn't assigned in a single moment. It was built through repetition, through silence, through me being good at handling things no one else wanted to deal with. That realization wasn't comforting, but it was stabilizing, because if a role can be learned, it can also be unlearned. I lay back and stared at the ceiling. The same ceiling I'd stared at after other nights like this. Nights where I'd told myself, next time will be different. Nights where I'd gone back into the same dynamic, just hoping for a better outcome. This time felt different. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just finished. Before you judge anyone in this story, ask yourself something. Have you ever been chosen for a role simply because you didn't resist it? Have you ever become the responsible one so slowly that you didn't notice when responsibility turned into obligation? That's how these roles survive. Not through force, through familiarity. And that's where this really begins. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was replaying the dinner. I'd already accepted what happened at the table. What kept me awake was quieter than anger. It was the shape of a pattern I could finally see. The next morning, the ocean looked calm from my balcony. The kind of calm that makes you think everything is fine if you only look from far enough away. I made coffee. I drank it slowly. Then I opened my laptop. I didn't do it like someone spiraling. I did it like someone finally filing paperwork that should have been filed years ago. I created a new folder. I named it Nothing Emotional, just records. Then I started pulling up statements, checking dates, searching old emails, downloading confirmations. At first, I told myself I was only looking for context. I wanted to understand how we got here. But after the first few entries, I realized I wasn't collecting context. I was collecting evidence. And something else happened while I was doing it. My mind stopped calling it help. It started calling it what it was. A system. I made a simple list. Date. What it was for. Amount. Who asked. How it was framed. Some of it was big and obvious. A temporary loan that lasted 2 years. A just this once that became monthly. A can you cover it and we'll settle up later that never got settled. But the first thing that hit me wasn't the totals. It was the way the requests were made, or rather, the way they stopped being requests at all. That's the first sign. If you've ever lived this, not the money, the assumption. When people still see you as a person, they ask, they explain, they wait for your answer. When they see you as a solution, they decide first and inform you after. I stared at my screen and thought about the dinner. The server didn't ask, "How would you like to handle this?" He didn't ask if we wanted to split it. He placed it in front of me like it belonged there. That wasn't his idea. That was the story my family had been telling for years. I scrolled through my bank app and felt my jaw tighten, not from rage, but from recognition. There it was again. The second sign. Gratitude that comes in tiny bursts. A thank you text. A quick hug. A public compliment when someone's watching. Just enough warmth to keep you doing it. Not enough respect to stop them from expecting it next time. I'd gotten those little payouts. "Claire, you're the only one who really shows up. You always handle things so well. I don't know what we'd do without you." They sounded like appreciation. But they functioned like leverage, because when the next request came, it wasn't paired with gratitude. It was paired with pressure. That's the third sign. Guilt used as currency. If I hesitated, the language shifted immediately. Not, "Are you okay?" But, "Are you really going to do this to us?" Not, "Can we figure this out another way?" But, "After everything we've done for you," I didn't have to imagine those lines. I could see them in old messages. The phrases repeated like templates. And here's the part I didn't want to admit. It worked on me. It worked because I had built my identity around being the good one, the responsible one, the one who doesn't make things harder. There's a moment, if you've ever been in this role, when you realize being good is not a personality trait, it's a survival strategy. It's how you keep the peace in a system that rewards silence and punishes boundaries. I looked at the numbers again, and instead of feeling proud that I had carried it, I felt something colder. I felt like I had been paying for my seat at a table where I was never offered a menu. I kept going. I pulled up emails with subject lines like "quick question and small favor" and "can you help me out?" The titles were soft. The content was not. I found one from my mom from a year ago. It wasn't a request. It was an itinerary. She'd already booked something, already invited people, already assumed I'd cover a portion because it would look better that way. Look better. That phrase is expensive. It always has been. Then I opened a chain from my sister. A pitch deck attached. Lots of bold fonts. Lots of confidence. At the bottom of one message, she'd written, "You're my safety net. You always catch me." It was meant to be sweet. It didn't feel sweet anymore, because safety nets are supposed to be built by design, not by one person quietly bleeding out underneath everyone else. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. And this is where the aha moment hit me. Not like a motivational quote, not like a dramatic breakthrough, more like a simple fact. I wasn't powerless. I was just unorganized. I had been operating like someone trying to win an argument with feelings. Meanwhile, the people around me were winning with structure. They had a system: ask, pressure, receive, move on. I had no system. I had emotions. I had hope. I had a belief that if I just stayed steady long enough, things would balance out. They don't balance out on their own. That's a fairy tale people tell the dependable person, so the dependable person keeps paying. I opened a new document and typed a sentence I'd never said to myself before. Helping is voluntary. Funding is not. Then I made another list. Not of what I'd paid, but of what I would no longer do. No more covering surprise expenses. No more being added to plans after the fact. No more making other people's image my responsibility. As I typed, I realized something about power that no one teaches you when you're the good kid. Real power doesn't announce itself early. It doesn't argue in public. It prepares. It keeps receipts. It keeps timelines. It keeps boundaries. And then, when the moment comes, it speaks once, not to be understood, to be final. If you're listening to this and your stomach feels tight, I want you to ask yourself one question. When was the last time someone asked you, sincerely, can you afford this, and actually waited for your answer? Because if they stopped asking a long time ago, it's not because you're strong, it's because you've been assigned a role, and roles can be rewritten. 3 days later, I was still in that records folder, not obsessing, not spiraling, just building a timeline. I'd been careful. I'd been neat. I'd been almost clinical. Because I'd learned something about myself in the last week. If I let this stay emotional, I would get pulled back in. If I kept it factual, I could stay standing. That morning, I opened my email and typed my sister's name into the search bar, then my mother's, then keywords that had become familiar over the years. Quick favor, short term, just until next month. The screen filled up like a confession. I clicked through one thread at a time, saving anything that involved money, plans, commitments. I downloaded invoices. I took screenshots of confirmations. I labeled everything with dates. It wasn't dramatic. It was boring. And that's what made it dangerous. Because boring is where patterns hide. Around noon, my phone buzzed. A message from my mom. Can we talk today? Let's not make this a big thing. I didn't respond. Instead, I clicked open a PDF attachment from an old email, one I'd ignored at the time because it had been sent during a family weekend and I didn't want to ruin the mood. The subject line had been, "Just so you're in the loop." Those words sound harmless. They're not. When someone says, "just so you're in the loop," what they often mean is, "this is already happening. Your input is no longer required." I opened the PDF. It was a proposal packet, clean design, professional formatting, my sister's name at the top, her logo, her mission statement, the usual confident language that looks good in a pitch. I scrolled, then I saw it. In the section labeled financial support, there was a line that made my throat go tight, not with sadness, but with clarity. My name, not as a suggestion, not as a possibility, as a listed backer, a sponsor, a financial guarantor. I stared at it for a long time. The way you stare at something when your brain refuses to accept that it's real. Because it wasn't just wrong, it was reckless. I zoomed in. I read it again. Then I did what I'd been doing all week. I looked for the paper trail. I searched my inbox for anything that would explain how my name got there. Any consent, any question, any "are you okay with this?" Nothing. No signature request. No heads up. No message like, "Hey, I put you down as support. Are you comfortable?" Just silence. And then the confident assumption printed in black ink. I felt my hands go cold. Not shaking, just cold. Because this wasn't about a dinner bill anymore. This wasn't about a family being inconsiderate. This was about liability, reputation. My name was attached to something I hadn't agreed to. If that proposal went out, if it landed in the wrong hands, if anyone asked questions, I'd be the one explaining. I kept scrolling. There were more details, figures, timelines. a list of planned expenses that matched things I had been seeing in my bank statements for years. That's when the rest of the pieces snapped into place. The surprise bills, the temporary transfers, the way they'd been pushing me to cover costs tied to my sister's image. It wasn't random, it was infrastructure. I leaned back in my chair and listened to the sound of the waves outside. Calm, predictable, like they didn't care what was happening in my inbox. I opened my bank statement and cross-referenced the dates. A transfer from last spring that I'd labeled helping with rent lined up with a payment to a printing company. Another transfer I'd thought was to get her through a slow month matched an invoice for event signage. It wasn't rent. It was branding. I wasn't supporting my sister. I was financing a version of her she wanted strangers to applaud, and my family had decided that was my job. I clicked on the file name again, just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Then I did the simplest thing I could do. I took a screenshot, then another, the page with my name, the section title, the date in the corner. I saved them to the folder, because this is what adulthood looks like sometimes. It's not yelling, it's not crying, it's documentation. I checked the metadata on the PDF. I checked the email header. I looked at the forwarding chain. It had come from my mother, sent to my sister, copied to me as an afterthought, just so you're in the loop. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my sister. Claire, why are you being weird? Mom said you're upset. Weird. That word made me smile, once, without warmth. In my family, weird means you're not doing what we expect. I didn't reply. I opened another email thread from my mother. There was a message from 2 months ago. Sweetheart, it would mean so much if you could help. This is for her future. For her future. As if my future was already paid for, already secured, already less important. I stood up and walked to the sink. I rinsed my coffee mug even though it wasn't dirty, just to move my body, just to keep my breathing steady. Then I came back and sat down. And I wrote an email draft in a fresh window. I didn't send it. Not yet. But I needed to see the words on the screen. I am not consenting to my name being used in any financial materials. Remove it immediately. Short, clear, no apology. Because here's the thing. When emotions are involved, families argue for days. When liability is involved, the rules change. Suddenly, there are consequences. Suddenly, it's not about being loving or unloving. It's about what you can prove. I looked back at the folder labeled records. It was already thick with receipts. And I realized the story I'd been telling myself about me being the stable one, the helpful one. The good one had been missing one word. I wasn't just stable. I was convenient. And the moment you stop being convenient, people show you exactly what they expected from you all along. Let me ask you something. Have you ever found your name in a plan you never agreed to? Because that is the moment a family problem stops being emotional and becomes structural. They showed up that evening without asking. I heard the knock before I saw them. Not rushed, not hesitant. The kind of knock that assumes the door will open. I didn't answer right away. I finished rinsing the plate in the sink. I dried my hands. Then I walked to the door. My mother stood in front. My father just behind her. My sister slightly to the side. Phone already in her hand. No one said hello. No one asked how I was. My mother stepped inside first, like she always had. She glanced around the apartment, not to admire it, but to assess it. as if she were checking whether I was still doing fine enough to handle things. My father cleared his throat. My sister sighed. Then my mother said it. "Let's not turn this into something bigger than it needs to be." That was the opening line. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "We didn't realize how much this affected you." Just an instruction. Keep it calm. Keep it contained. Keep it convenient. They sat down without waiting for an invitation. I stayed standing. My sister started talking first. She spoke quickly, like someone trying to get ahead of the problem. "You know this wasn't intentional," she said. "We just assumed you'd understand. We're family." There it was. Assumed. My mother nodded. "Your sister has a lot riding on this. We just need you to smooth things over. Make it look normal." Look normal. I noticed how no one mentioned the proposal. No one mentioned my name being listed as financial support. No one mentioned consent. They weren't here to discuss what happened. They were here to manage the outcome. My father finally spoke. "You're good at handling this kind of thing. That's all we're saying. Handling it." That word landed differently now, because suddenly I could see what none of them were seeing. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about disruption. They weren't asking if I was okay, because, in their minds, that question didn't apply anymore. When you've been the solution for long enough, people stop checking on the source. They just check whether the system is still running. I sat down across from them and folded my hands on the table, not defensively, just neatly. My mother leaned forward. "We don't want any bad feelings. You know how this looks from the outside." From the outside. I realized something in that moment. They were speaking to me the way you speak to a service. Calm, directive, focused on resolution. Not like you speak to a person who might be hurt. This wasn't cruelty. It was efficiency. And efficiency is what happens when empathy has already been removed from the equation. People don't wake up one day and decide to stop seeing someone as human. It happens gradually. It happens when one person keeps absorbing the cost so others don't have to feel it. It happens when gratitude becomes a transaction instead of a relationship. It happens when the role works too well. I thought about every time I'd stayed quiet to keep the peace. Every time I'd said yes to avoid an argument. Every time I'd fixed something before it became a problem for them. That's how you teach people you don't need care. That's how you train them to see you as a function. My sister crossed her arms. "So what do you want us to do?" she asked. "Make a big apology tour?" "No." They still didn't get it. This wasn't about apologies. It was about acknowledgement, about asking a question they'd stopped asking years ago. "Are you okay with this?" And then waiting. Instead, my mother said, "You're overthinking it. We've always relied on you. That's not a bad thing. Relying, another soft word for dependence that only flows one way." I looked at each of them, one by one, not with anger, with clarity. They weren't villains in a story. They were people who had grown comfortable with a version of me that required no maintenance, a version that didn't ask for reassurance, a version that didn't need checking in on, a version that functioned. And here's the truth no one likes to say out loud. When you exist as a function long enough, people panic when you start acting like a person. That's what this visit was. Panic. Not about my feelings, about their loss of control. I stood up and walked to the window. I didn't look at them when I spoke. "I'm not smoothing anything over," I said. "And I'm not explaining this to make it easier for anyone." My mother inhaled sharply. My sister started to interrupt. My father shifted in his chair. I turned back to them. For a long time, I continued. I thought being needed was the same as being valued. No one responded. Now I know the difference. Silence stretched. Uncomfortable. Real. This was the moment the story changed. Not because I yelled, not because I threatened, but because I stopped performing the function they came to collect. If you're watching this and something in your chest feels tight, ask yourself one thing. When was the last time someone checked on you without needing something in return? Because if they stopped asking, it's not because you're strong. It's because they've been using you as infrastructure. And infrastructure is invisible until it stops working. The meeting happened the next morning. Not at my apartment, not over dinner, at a conference room downtown, the kind my sister liked to use because it made everything feel legitimate. Glass walls, neutral chairs, a long table that suggested decisions would be made. They were already there when I arrived. My mother and father on one side, my sister at the head, laptop open, notes pulled up. She looked prepared, confident. They expected a conversation. I brought a file. I took the seat across from them and placed it on the table. Thick, organized, labeled. No one spoke at first. So I started, "I'm not here to argue," I said. "I'm here to clarify." My sister leaned back. "Claire, this doesn't have to be so formal." I didn't respond to that. I opened the file and slid the first page across the table, a bank statement, highlighted. "This transfer," I said, pointing, March 14th, labeled as short-term support. My mother glanced at it and waved her hand slightly. "We've talked about that." "I know," I said. "This one funded printing costs for your launch." My sister's smile tightened. I turned the page. April 3rd, same pattern, different amount. Another page. May 21st, event deposit. I wasn't raising my voice. I wasn't rushing. I was walking them through it the way an accountant would, because this wasn't personal anymore. It was procedural. My father cleared his throat. "You've always helped. We didn't think I held up my hand, not aggressively, just enough to pause him. I'm not questioning intent," I said. "I'm documenting impact." I flipped to the next section, printed emails, subject lines visible, dates circled. These messages, I continued, show requests framed as temporary assistance. None of them include repayment terms. None include my consent to long-term use. My sister leaned forward. "You never said no." "That's not the same as saying yes," I replied. Silence. I slid another document forward, the proposal packet. The room changed when they saw it. My mother's eyes dropped to the page. My father shifted in his chair. My sister froze. "This is where my name appears," I said calmly, listed as financial support. I tapped the page once. "I did not authorize this." My sister finally spoke. It was implied. "No," I said. "It was assumed. There's a difference." I turned the page. This document was shared externally. That creates exposure, legal and reputational. My father frowned. "That's dramatic. It's accurate?" I said. I paused long enough for the words to land. "I want to be clear." I continued. "This meeting is not about feelings. It's about boundaries and risk." My mother tried again. "We're family. We can fix this quietly. That's what we've been doing." I said, "Quietly. And it's how we got here." I leaned back slightly and folded my hands. For years, support moved in one direction, without discussion, without limits. I looked at my sister. You built plans that included my resources without my agreement. I looked at my parents. You facilitated that because it was easier than stopping it. No one interrupted. I opened the last section of the file, a printed summary, clean, simple, effective immediately. I said, I'm withdrawing all financial support. My mother inhaled sharply. You can't just, I said, and I am. I kept going. My name is to be removed from all materials, proposals, and applications. My sister shook her head. This will hurt me. I know. I said, that doesn't make it my responsibility. My father leaned forward. After everything we've done for you, I met his eyes. This isn't repayment, I said. It's separation. Another pause. I'm not asking for understanding. I continued. I'm informing you of a decision. My sister looked down at her laptop, fingers hovering over the keys. You're putting us in a difficult position, she said quietly. I've been in that position for years. I replied. The room stayed still. No one clapped. No one argued. Because this wasn't a family debate. It was a termination. I gathered the documents back into the folder and stood. There will be no more transfers, I said. No more coverage. No more assumptions. I paused at the door. If there are questions, I added, they should be directed to legal counsel. That sentence ended everything. I walked out without looking back. In the elevator, I exhaled for the first time all morning. Not relief, stability, because this is what it feels like when order returns. Not loud, not emotional, just clear. If you've ever thought power looks like shouting or winning arguments, it doesn't. Power looks like preparation. It looks like records. It looks like knowing when the conversation is over. I didn't feel victorious after that meeting. There was no rush, no release, just quiet. 3 days later, my phone stopped lighting up. No more urgent messages. No more, can you cover this? No more soft panic disguised as politeness. That's when it hit me. Justice doesn't announce itself with noise. It arrives with absence. For a long time, I believed fairness worked like a scale. Whoever carried more pain deserved more consideration. Whoever suffered quietly should eventually be repaid. That belief kept me stuck. Because the world doesn't correct itself based on who hurts the most. It corrects itself based on structure. What I did wasn't dramatic. I didn't confront anyone emotionally. I didn't demand apologies or explanations. I closed accounts. I removed my name. I ended access. And suddenly, everything changed. Not because people became kinder, but because the system stopped enabling them. There's a version of justice we're taught early on, the kind that looks like tears, raised voices, confessions, someone admitting they were wrong. That version feels satisfying. It also rarely lasts, because emotional justice depends on memory and guilt, and both fade. Structural justice doesn't. When money stopped flowing, priorities shifted. When my name disappeared from documents, decisions slowed down. When access was gone, so was entitlement. No one said sorry. They didn't have to. The behavior changed. That's how you know it worked. If you've ever waited for someone to understand how much you were hurting before they changed. I need you to hear this. Understanding is optional. Constraints are not. People don't adjust their behavior because they suddenly feel bad. They adjust when the environment changes. I didn't punish anyone. I redesigned the conditions. And here's the part that surprised me most. I didn't feel cold afterward. I felt calm. Because justice isn't about winning emotionally. It's about restoring balance without needing to be seen as righteous. I wasn't trying to prove I was right. I was making sure it couldn't happen again. That's the difference. Revenge wants a reaction. Justice wants stability. When I stopped funding the imbalance, the conflict ended on its own. No speeches, no closure talk, just a system correcting itself. If you're watching this and thinking, but they'll think I'm heartless, ask yourself something. Do they think you're kind now, or do they just think you're available? Because those two things are not the same. Real fairness doesn't require you to bleed for it. It requires you to stop leaking. For years, I thought protecting the relationship meant protecting the people. I was wrong. Sometimes. The only way to save what's left of your dignity is to stop negotiating with emotion and start setting limits with precision. I didn't take anything from them. I just stopped giving what wasn't asked for properly. And the moment I did, the dynamic collapsed. That's not cruelty, that's consequence. Justice didn't come from my tears. It came from my records. It came from knowing where the lines were and finally drawing them in ink instead of hope. If you're still waiting for someone to feel bad enough to treat you fairly, you might be waiting forever. But if you change the structure, you won't have to wait at all. Justice doesn't need you to suffer loudly. It just needs you to stop participating in what hurts you. That's when balance returns. Quietly, permanently. If you're watching this and you're thinking, I could never do that, I understand. Not because you're weak, because you've been trained. People don't realize how much practice it takes to say yes. How many small moments you've survived by being agreeable, by being easy, by being the one who doesn't cause problems. Saying no isn't scary because it's a hard word. It's scary because of what comes after it. The silence, the shift in tone, the way people suddenly look at you like you've changed, even though you're the same person who's been carrying them the entire time. When I withdrew support, the hardest part wasn't the meeting, it wasn't the paperwork, it wasn't even the confrontation. It was the quiet afterward. Because I'd spent years earning love through usefulness. And when you stop being useful, you find out what kind of love you were actually getting. That's a brutal discovery. And if you're someone who grew up being the responsible one, you don't just fear losing people. You fear being labeled selfish, ungrateful, cold, disrespectful. You fear becoming the villain in a story where you've always been the helper. Let me tell you something that no one told me early enough. Being called selfish is not the end of your life. Being drained is. If you keep saying yes out of fear, the bill still comes due. It just comes to you in different forms. It comes as exhaustion you can't explain. It comes as resentment you feel guilty about. It comes as a body that stays tense even on days nothing is happening. It comes as relationships where you're only safe as long as you're giving. And the worst part is, you'll start to confuse love with pressure. You'll start to believe that discomfort is proof you're doing the right thing. It's not. Sometimes discomfort is your nervous system telling you the truth before your mind can accept it. Here's what helped me, and I want you to take this slowly. You don't have to go from yes to never again overnight. You don't have to blow up your family. You don't have to make a dramatic exit to prove you matter. Sometimes no starts smaller than people think. It starts with, I can't do that this month. It starts with, I need that in writing. It starts with, I'm not comfortable being responsible for that. And then you stop talking. That last part is important because people who benefit from your yes will always ask for an explanation they can dismantle. They don't want clarity, they want access. So you keep it simple, you repeat yourself if you have to, and you let the discomfort exist without solving it. That's the real work. Not yelling, not persuading, just holding your ground while everyone else tries to pull you back into the role they miss. You're going to feel guilty at first. Of course you are. Guilt is what happens when you start acting against a system you were trained to protect. But guilt is not always a sign you did something wrong. Sometimes guilt is just withdrawal. It's your body reacting to the absence of a pattern it's been performing for years. And here's the part that sounds harsh but will save you. If someone only stays close when you're paying, fixing, covering, tolerating, and absorbing, they are not attached to you. They're attached to your function. And functions don't get loved. They get used. If you've been living like a safety net, listen carefully. Safety nets are not meant to be one person's spine. They're meant to be designed, shared, supported. If you're the only net, you're not a net. You're a sacrifice. I'm not telling you to abandon everyone. I'm telling you to stop abandoning yourself. Because the truth is, you can lose years trying to keep a peace that only exists when you're the one bleeding quietly. And when you finally stop, it will feel lonely for a while. But loneliness is not the same as regret. Loneliness passes. Regret stays. So if you're scared to say no, don't start by being brave. Start by being honest with yourself. What is this costing you? What are you paying to be accepted? And what would happen if you kept that money, that time, that energy, and invested it back into your own life? You don't need permission to matter. You don't need someone to agree with your boundary for it to be valid. You just need to stop negotiating with the part of you that already knows the truth. The apartment is quiet now, not the heavy kind of quiet that follows an argument. The clean kind, the kind where nothing is waiting for you when you sit down. In the mornings, there are no urgent messages, no reminders, no soft emergencies disguised as family business. My phone stays face down on the table, and it stays that way. Money still moves, bills still get paid. But they move on my schedule now, not someone else's panic. For a long time, I thought freedom would feel loud, like relief, like celebration, like finally being seen. It doesn't. Freedom is subtle. It shows up as space between notifications, as evenings that don't end in negotiations, as weekends that belong to you again. I didn't gain anything dramatic. I didn't suddenly become richer or happier overnight. I just stopped leaking. And when you stop leaking, things stabilize. What surprised me most wasn't how much money stayed in my account. It was how much energy came back. I sleep through the night now, not because life is perfect, but because no one is quietly pulling on me while I rest. I used to believe that being needed was the same as being valued, that if people depended on me, it meant I mattered. I was wrong. Dependence is fragile. It disappears the moment you stop supplying it. Respect is different. Respect stays even when access is gone. The people who remained in my life after I closed the door weren't the ones who needed me most. They were the ones who never confused me with a resource. And that distinction changed everything. If you're watching this and wondering whether it's worth it, I won't lie to you. You will lose something when you stop being the last one to pay. You might lose proximity. You might lose approval. You might lose the version of yourself that everyone found convenient. But what you gain doesn't announce itself right away. It settles in slowly. It looks like peace that doesn't require effort. It looks like decisions made without fear. It looks like knowing that your yes actually means something again. I didn't burn bridges. I just stopped carrying everyone across them. And the ones who could walk on their own kept walking with me. That's the part no one warns you about. When you step out of a role that was draining you, the world doesn't collapse. It reorganizes, quietly. So if you've always been the one who pays at the end of the night, the one who covers the gap, the one who absorbs the pressure so others don't have to, you're not imagining the weight, and you're not wrong for wanting to put it down. You don't owe the version of yourself that survived everything your future. You're allowed to write a new role, one where you're not the backup plan, not the safety net, not the silent solution, just a person. Living within their means, protecting their energy, and choosing where their effort goes, freedom doesn't clap when it arrives. It doesn't ask to be acknowledged. It just sits beside you in a quiet room and lets you breathe. And if you've ever been the one who paid last, maybe it's time to stop playing that part.